Thank you, David. That was very nice. Well, this is our third last class. I don't know what you guys are going to do without me. It's been a long haul. As I was saying to Linda, I hope you're all thankful that I got you through COVID for the last 2.5 years.
Yes.
He got through it.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
He didn't get it.
So tonight I want to talk about integral spiritual development. And now the last couple of classes we've talked about states of consciousness, and then we switched over to structures of consciousness. What I want to do is show how the two are connected tonight. In his book, Integral Spirituality, Wilber has explained the lengthy process researchers in developmental studies went through to arrive at a solution to how these two were fit together. Let me see. There we go. Now, this lady is Jane Loevinger. So in the early days of the discussion, researchers took the highest structure in Western psychological models, which was usually somewhere around spiral dynamics global view, or Jane Loevinger's integrated, or Wilber's centaur, and then stacked the 3 or 4 major stages of meditation, which are, of course, gross, subtle, causal, non-dual. In the Christian tradition, those are roughly compared to initiation, purification, illumination, and unification. So the idea is that they would just stack those on top of the other stages. Loevinger's research focused on the self-related stages in the line of development. Now, let's see who we've got here in the room. Well, Margaret, why don't you start us off with reading number 1? It's a quickie, but it's a good one.
Sure, reading 1. Thus, you would go from Loevinger's integrated level, centaur, to psychic level, to subtle level, to causal level, to non-dual level, bam, 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 East and West integrated. Get Wilber, integral spirituality.
I like his humor. He's great. Anyway, so this is, it was a start. So this is what it would look like on the right here. So these were the levels in the non-bolded here that Loevinger came up with in the line of development having to do with self-identity.
Okay.
So you can see the integrated levels up here at turquoise. And so what Wilber is saying is that the early transpersonal thinkers just decided, okay, we'll put these 4 higher levels of consciousness right on top of that, and we're done. So as he says, at least it was a start. Some people were taking both Western and Eastern approaches seriously. But problems arose almost immediately. Do you really have to progress through all of Loevinger's stages to have a spiritual experience? If you have an illumination experience as described by St. John of the Cross, does that mean you have passed through all 8 value levels of Clare Graves? As Wilber says, this doesn't sound quite right. And then a second problem quickly compounded the first one. And maybe, Margaret, you could read the second one since that first one was so short.
2. If enlightenment or any sort of unio mystica really meant going through all of those 8 stages, then how could somebody 2,000 years ago be enlightened? Since some of the stages, like systemic global view, are recent emergence. All of our early attempts at integration were stalling around this issue of how to relate the meditative stages and the Western developmental stages, and there it sat stalled for about 2 decades. Ken Wilber, Integral Spirituality.
Thank you, very clear. Part of the problem centered around figuring out what enlightenment actually is. What does it really mean to be enlightened in an evolving world? How can it be defined in a way that would satisfy all the evidence? both from those claiming to have attained it and to those studying it. Any definition of enlightenment would have to explain what it means to be enlightened today, but also explain how the same definition was operative in earlier eras, when some of today's stages were not present. So if we can't do that, this would mean that only a person alive today could be fully enlightened or spiritually awakened, which makes no sense at all. In other words, can we say that someone 2,000 years ago, such as Buddha or Jesus Christ or Padmasambhava, was enlightened or fully realized or spiritually awakened in any meaningful way? This complex of problems forced something of a Gordian knot for the better part of 2 decades. The first real break came in understanding the difference between states and structures, which we've just talked about in the last 2 classes, that they were not equal and how they might actually be related. Okay, so maybe Sai, you could read number 3 for us.
A few years after I introduced a suggested solution, my friend Alan Coombs, working independently, hit upon an essentially similar idea. And so, in a painfully transparent bid for history, we named this the Wilber-Combs Lattice, after months of me having to explain to Alan how silly the Combs-Wilber lattice sounded.
Okay, so this is what that fellow Alan Combs looks like. Pretty friendly looking guy. So the key idea to realize is that most meditative states are variations on the natural states of gross waking, subtle dreaming, and causal formlessness. Then they are present or can be present at virtually all stages of growth. Because even the earliest stages, because people even at the earliest stages wake, dream, and sleep. Therefore, if you take any structure stage sequence, such as Gebser's, which you'll remember goes from archaic to magic to mythic to rational to pluralistic and to integral, and then put them in a vertical column on the left side of the grid or lattice, and then put the major states across the top, and those are the 4 that I just mentioned: gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual. You get a simple version of the Wilber-Combs lattice, which looks like that. So here you have the stages that were started by Gebser. He didn't get to the supra-integral level, but he got the others. And then you have the natural states at the top: gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual. Now, just as a side note, you'll notice underneath the gross, it says nature. That refers to the type of mysticism that is available to you if you're in this level of reality. Nature mysticism. If you spend a lot of time in the subtle world, then you are capable of having experiences of deity mysticism, according to Wilber. Then when you move up to the causal world, you can have formless mysticism events occur. And if you ever decide to make it to non-dual, then you'll have non-dual mysticism, which he has gone into some detail in his earlier books, particularly Integral Spirituality, but we're not really going to focus on those tonight. So what follows is Wilber's explanation, which differs in some small details from Combs's view. You can see from this particular matrix that there are 28 state experiences available to people. Now, the thing to note, if you're a Christian and you believe the Bible in a literal way, you still have access right across here to all 4 of these states of consciousness every day, right? You're awake in the gross world, You're sleeping in the subtle world. You're having non-dreaming sleep in the causal world. And I suspect you're probably touching the non-dual, but you have absolutely no memory of it. So that's also true if you make the evolutionary step to go to rational thinking. You also have, you notice the colors are different here than they were here, but you still have access to all four. Okay. So a person at any one of the 7 stages in Gebser's sociocultural line of development can have a peak experience of a gross, subtle, causal, or non-dual state. So you're minding your own business at Mythic, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you have a causal experience in the integral world. The critically important point about this diagram is that you will interpret that state according to the stage that you're at. So you won't, if you're at Mythic, there's no way you can really understand what integral is about. You'll dumb down an experience that happens up here and put it in your own language over here. And so there will be a great deal of it that you just won't understand. It'll just go right over your head. Okay. So this was a breakthrough and a real turning point for early researchers. It allowed them to see how individuals at even some of the lower stages of development, such as magic or mythic, can still have profound religious, spiritual, and meditative state experiences. The gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual states no longer needed to be stacked on top of the Western conventional stages. Instead, they were states, which include altered states of consciousness and peak experiences that can and did occur alongside any of those stages. Okay, let's see. Maybe Belinda could read this next one. Or it's number 4. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm wearing the wrong glasses. Okay, I'm gonna. The point is that a person can have a profound peak religious, spiritual, or meditative experience of, say, a subtle light or causal emptiness, but they will interpret that experience with the only equipment they have, namely the tools at the stage of development they are at. A person at magic will interpret them magically. A person at mythic will interpret them mythically. A person at pluralistic will interpret them pluralistically, and so on. But a person at mythic will not interpret them pluralistically because that structure stage of consciousness has not yet emerged or developed.
You're wrong. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, good, thank you. So this idea of the stage or structure of consciousness an individual lives at, determining their interpretation of their religious or spiritual experience, is so central to Wilber's thought that I believe there's real value in unpacking it a little further. So let's take the example of Christianity, shall we? For the sake of an example, let's say a person at the magic level, I'll bring back this. Okay, so somebody at the magic level here has a state experience of Jesus. They will experience Jesus as a personal savior who can miraculously alter the world in order to satisfy my every whim and desire. Jesus is a magician who can turn water into wine, multiply loaves and fishes, walk on water, etc. We're not talking about whether Jesus actually walked on water, just that this is the thing that would impress me most at this stage. Because this stage is pre-conventional and egocentric, this Jesus cares only about me. Okay, so if you come up to mythic, the same kind of subtle state experience of Jesus might be typo in my notes here, might be interpreted as communion with Jesus, the eternal truth bringer. This stage is absolutistic in its beliefs, so you'll either believe the word exactly as written, or you will burn in hell forever. This stage is also ethnocentric, so only those who believe in Jesus Christ as their personal savior can be saved. But let's say you continue to evolve and you make it to the rational stage. Here, the mental rational, Jesus Christ becomes a humanized figure, still fully divine and fully human, but now fully human in a more believable way, as a teacher of the universal love of a deistic God. Because this stage is the beginning of the post-conventional and world-centric stages, this is also the first of the stages of development that can find salvation through Jesus Christ, but also allow that others might find equal salvation through a different path. This is the stage articulated in Vatican II. All right, so a lot of people in the world have moved up to pluralistic at the moment. If you have a series of profound spiritual experiences at the pluralistic stage, you may feel an affinity for the authors of the postmodern Bible, for instance, which is one example among many of interpretations of Jesus Christ and the Christ experience through the lens of the green stage of development. And then let's assume that you're a follower of Wilber and you've made it to integral. In Gebser's writings, the integral stage was a single stage. But for Wilber, this is simply the opening to at least 4 higher structure stages of development. Individuals at any of these 4 stages will insist on integrating an experience of Christ consciousness with other expressions of the Holy Spirit around the world. In this case, you might be drawn to reading Wilber to find out more. In another publication, Wilber provides us with a different example of how states of consciousness might be aligned with a different line of development. This time referencing Carol Gilligan's 4 stages of moral development. These stages, you will recall, are the egocentric, the ethnocentric, the world-centric, and the cosmocentric. In this case, the matrix formed in combination with the 4 major states, gross, subtle, causal, and non-dual, yields 16 possible state structure experiences, 4 by 4. Alrighty. Now I'm hoping Alan is online. I didn't see him at the time when I
Yep.
clicked. Okay, there you are. Number
Hi,
5,
yes.
please, Alan.
Okay. For example, if you are at an ethnocentric stage of development and you have a unity state peak experience of being one with everything or one with the ground of being, you might interpret that as an experience of oneness with Jesus and conclude that nobody can be saved unless they accept Jesus as their personal savior. Hence, the ethnocentric nature of your interpretation. You must belong to this one group in order to be saved. But if you are at an egocentric stage and have the same experience, you might believe that you yourself are Jesus Christ. And if you are at a cosmocentric or integral stage and have that non-dual experience, you will likely conclude that you and all sentient beings, without exception, are one with spirit in the timeless here and now. Wilbur.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So to summarize then, you can be at almost any stage of consciousness and have a peak experience of virtually any state of consciousness. You will therefore interpret the state according to the stage that you live at. If someone at an ethnocentric stage has an awakening experience, if anything, it makes them more ethnocentric. It confirms their view of life. Okay, so let me see. How about Ingrid tonight? For number 6.
Yep, I just needed to unmute. Okay, reading 6. We all know examples of reborn Christians who have had very powerful state experiences. They glow, they are radiant, they are translucent, and they are fascists. This is because they are still at an ethnocentric stage, and bless them, think that Jesus is the one and only way. From Ken Wilber in the foreword to a book called The Translucent Revolution.
Okay, well, I did end up talking a little bit about the types of mysticism that I showed you. Well, let's go back up here. Where are we? The levels of consciousness. Yeah, here it is. Sorry. So I am going to talk about these 4 for a couple of minutes. Since the Wilber-Combs lattice was originally conceived, Wilber has added extra features to it. One such addition appears across the top of the diagram as the terms nature, deity, formless, and non-dual under the names of the states. These 4 terms refer to the types of mysticism accessible within the major states of consciousness. What Wilber is indicating is that you can have a peak experience, or what he calls an intensification of that state. One of the ultimate peak experiences in any realm is to be one with the phenomenon in that realm. Okay, how about Lisa for this next reading, which is number 7.
To experience a oneness with all phenomena in the gross waking state is a typical nature mysticism. To experience a oneness with all phenomena in the subtle dream state is a typical deity mysticism. To experience a oneness with all phenomena or lack thereof in the causal unmanifest state is a typical formless mysticism. To experience a oneness with all phenomena arising in gross, subtle, and causal states is a typical non-dual mysticism.
Thank you. I see Claire's here.
Yeah.
Great. So what he's summarizing here has been written in much larger versions of, whole libraries of books have been written about these 4 kinds of mysticism. And I don't know that too many other people have categorized them in this way. But it's actually fairly elegant, if you like, in the mathematical or scientific sense, that it covers a lot of territory in a succinct way that actually makes sense when you go back and look at the individual discussions. So by adding these different types of mysticism to the Wilber-Combs lattice, it helps us to see that individuals might have an experience of oneness with nature and hence be nature mystics, but will interpret that oneness quite differently depending on the stage they're at. You can have a profound experience of oneness with nature and still be at a red level or an amber level, an orange level, a green level, and so on. So there isn't simply a variety of religious, spiritual, or meditative experiences provided by the upper left quadrant. There is actually a variety of interpreted religious, spiritual, or meditative experiences, because those experiences are always set within the context of structures, which you remember are normally hidden from awareness and are interpreted according to their more or less limited views. So far we've been describing how people interpret a particular state experience according to the stage that they are at. To prevent anyone from seeing this as an overly simplistic explanation, Wilber goes on to say that this phrase is actually shorthand for according to the entire aqual matrix, which is operative at the time of the state experience. In other words, interpretation is always a four-quadrant affair. He then gives us a glimpse of the true complexity involved in the following quotation. And this is, I often think that some of the theories that people come up with to explain how human beings are structured are a little bit too simplistic. So take a look at what he puts into this and see if this is a simplistic view. Okay, Bill, would you be so kind as to read number 8 for us?
The aqua matrix particularly includes levels and lines in the UL upper left quadrant. A person will interpret an experience based on their psychograph, which means a multitude of intelligence all operating at once, clamoring for recognition by the self. In the LL, or the lower left quadrant, cultural backgrounds and intersubjective context are decisive and almost entirely pre-conscious. In the UR, upper right quadrant, neurophysiological parameters set an enormous number of interpretive frames. In the LR, or lower right quadrant, social systems have almost as strong an influence as Marx claimed. None of these factors can be overlooked. All of them have a hand in how an individual will interpret any moment of his or her experience. It is the entire aqua matrix in every moment that speaks in and through an individual.
So that's just sort of opening a door to what's really going on in each of us and why we're all unique, because there's so many choices in each of these quadrants. I mean, there are dozens if you take a look at the upper right, or sorry, the upper left quadrant, and you talk about a psychograph, which is a listing of all the lines of development. There are at least 20 different lines of development that have been identified, and probably more. And you show up somewhere on all of those lines. And the way you're constructed is completely different than your siblings even. That's just one quadrant. So there's a lot going on in everything that we decide to do or not do. Thanks for reading that, Bill. So we now know that integral theory has discovered the fact that human beings have two very important but very different axes of growth and development. One of these axes Wilber calls waking up, and he puts it in all caps. This is the meditative growth sequence through 5 or 6 levels of states of consciousness discovered several millennia ago by Eastern traditions, and he's thinking specifically of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Each of these state stages are not naturally occurring stages of growth for all humans. They are, in fact, the result of a voluntary set of actions taken by a person to grow through all of his or her state possibilities, hopefully ending at a full awakening and awareness of all the basic states of consciousness, including ultimate non-dual unity consciousness. Wilber understands this as a supreme identity of the individual with ultimate spirit. This emptiness is timeless and is also known as radical awakening. The other axis is called growing up, again in all caps. This was only discovered in the past century by researchers in the West. This is the natural growth and development sequence through 6 to 8 levels of structures of consciousness, each with its hidden maps or rules of grammar that cannot be seen by those structure states themselves. This form evolves over time and is often called evolutionary awakening. So all human beings thus have a dual center of gravity at every point in their lives. They have a structure center at the magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, or integral level, but they also have a state center in the gross, subtle, causal, witness, or non-dual state. The combination of these two is what Wilber calls their cosmic address. K, cosmic with a K. The problem is that at the moment, those involved in systems that stress one or the other center or axis have no idea of the existence or value of the other. No one working on growing up, who are mostly Western, has any idea whatsoever about any of the state stages of waking up. They have no awareness of enlightenment, awakening, moksha, satori, the great liberation, the supreme identity, nothing. Similarly, not one of the wisdom traditions and paths of the great liberation, which are mostly Eastern, has any understanding or even mentions the major stages of typical growing up. They don't because even though they are masters of introspection, they simply cannot see these stages, these hidden maps of grammar rules, by introspecting. Okay, how about Joey? Could you read the 9th item for us?
Reading 9. So humans have 2 paths of incredibly important growth, and yet never in humankind's history have they been brought together in one place. This means that humanity, up to this point, has been training itself to be partial, fragmented, and broken. And the history of humanity to date is a history of broken humanity. Bringing these together, not only in theory, but in actual practice, has been one of the major contributions to integral theory and practice, and is, I believe, part of what should be included in any genuinely integral spirituality, including any fourth turning. This is truly revolutionary development.
Okay, thank you. Now is the time for humanity to integrate these 2 approaches, a feat never before possible. For the first time in history, we can include both states and structures in future versions of religion and or spirituality. So most forms of Western religion today lack any recognition of direct peak experiences of transpersonal or spiritual states of consciousness. They also do not offer a path to a full waking up through a contemplative system that spans the entire spectrum from gross to subtle to causal to emptiness to non-dual states. I'm going to turn to Jack now for number 10, if that's all right.
That's okay with me, brother. Number 10. This is odd in many ways because virtually all forms of Western and Eastern religions began as a series of mystical states and peak experiences had by the founder of the religion. The very first Christian gathering, the Pentecost, was marked by massive subtle realm mysticism, flames encircling heads, later such things as doves descending, viewing Christ in a resurrected subtle light body. And for the first several hundred years, mystical experience defined Christian awareness. Let the consciousness be in you that was in Christ Jesus, that we all may be one. That's St. Paul, I believe. You sought out a Christian teacher if he or she were sanctus, sanctified or awakened. Ken Wilber, The Religion of Tomorrow.
Now he's touching on an issue there that I'd rather not get into, which is the experiences of the founder of the religion. Are they mystical or not? That's a big debate, and I personally would say they're not, that they transcend what we think of as mysticism. But that's going to take us off our course if we focus on that now. So this this view of mysticism in the early stages was not to last. As the church increased in power by saying no one comes to salvation except by way of Mother Church, Christianity increasingly switched from direct mystical experiences to mythic narratives, beliefs, and legalistic creeds. To Wilber's mind, this was essentially a switch from spiritual waking up to earlier low levels of spiritual growing up. All right, let's see who's on tap here. Maybe Zilda could help us with number 11.
Mark, before we do that, could I just mention one thing that helped me to understand this waking up and growing up? So growing up, as I understand it in Wilber, is in the vertical dimension, and waking up is in the horizontal dimension. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, it depends on how you define those two, horizontal and vertical. You could also think of them as concentric circles. We had a diagram a few weeks ago that was a series of expanding circles, which is what I'd be a little more comfortable with when it comes to waking up. But at the same time, you could also make the case that making any kind of progress up the structures is also an expansion of your consciousness. As we just saw, when you move from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric and then cosmocentric, you're including more and more and more of the world in your circle of compassion, if you like. I don't know if that helps or makes it worse for you.
I don't know, I'll have to cogitate on that.
Okay.
But that distinction helped me. Okay, so growing up is vertical and waking up is horizontal, but it sort of covers both dimensions. But anyway, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
Number 11,
Yes, please.
mouthing the creeds replaced experiencing spirit. By the time of the Counter-Reformation, virtually all of the contemplative branches of Christianity had been severely curtailed, and the Spanish Inquisition, beginning in 1478 CE, was fully in place to guard against any experiences of the supreme identity, or an identity of subtle soul and causal God in the non-dual Godhead. Saints like Giordano Bruno were burned at the stake for stepping over the line. not to mention upward of perhaps 300,000 women burned at the stake for their experiential revels, charged with witchcraft.
Ugh, makes me shiver. What a history. So the net result was that the mythic structures of spiritual intelligence were permanently cemented into place as a dogma for all time. And states of consciousness were essentially banned across the board, especially since states, unlike mythic creed beliefs, could not be controlled by the church. That's the key to why they did that. Okay, if people are having altered states of consciousness or peak experiences, you can't control them the same way you can if they're not having them. Okay, so number 12, maybe Hangame could come to our rescue here.
For sure. The double problem with this move was A, Christianity lost all states, and thus catastrophically all access to waking up, and B, the mystic literal view of spiritual intelligence was frozen into place and made everlasting dogma, never to be questioned henceforth, thus freezing spiritual intelligence in growing up at its childish stage.
Boy, thank you. So during the Renaissance in the 15th and 16th centuries, as the other intelligences in the sciences, in medicine, in art, in law, in education and politics, began to move into modern rational, then postmodern pluralistic, then unifying integral, religion remained frozen at mythic literal. This is ethnocentric, racist, sexist, patriarchal, homophobic, authoritarian, absolutistic, dogmatic, and unquestionable. The Western world had, in effect, ceased its spiritual growth. Spiritual intelligence, which pertains to structures, the way we grow up, was frozen at mythic, or that of today's typical 7-year-old. And higher spiritual states, the way we wake up, were banned in general. Is David Oak online?
No, David's not with us tonight.
Okay. All righty. Jennifer Phillips is, though. She could help us with 13.
This is, in essence, the anemic state of Western spirituality today. A double catastrophe, low structures, no states. No wonder there has been such a rapidly declining church membership in the postmodern world. On average, only 11% of Northern Europeans are considered churched, as well as an avid interest in integral Christianity and other forms of more comprehensive spirituality.
Okay. I have to emphasize this is Wilber's view of religious history. Whether we agree with it or not is open to debate, I think. And it's, I think, in a way, pretty extreme. But it does make a certain amount of sense. But I want to press on before we have our discussions. So the goal of integrating states and structures was expressed in Buddhism, but in significantly different language. As we saw in part 2 of the Arc of Ascent, those who attain clear light or one taste come to see that reality is non-dual, which strictly means not two. This is the not two-ness of samsara and nirvana, the finite and the infinite, subject and object, form and emptiness. We saw in part 3 of this course that emptiness is void of all characterizations, including this one. So it hasn't changed since the time of the Buddha. In fact, it hasn't changed since the moment of the Big Bang. Okay. Linda Russell is our next person on the list for number 14.
The experience or recognition of emptiness is a simultaneous realization, metaphorically, of infinite freedom, release, the great liberation. Liberation from the binding conflict between subject and object, and all the torment and torture they inflict on each other.
And just stay on the line. I'm going to ask you to do 15 since that was so short, but just in a minute. Now, if the experience of emptiness is one of freedom, the experience of form is one of fullness. And while freedom hasn't changed since the beginning of time, fullness definitely has. Okay, and that's number 15.
Form, in fact, has undergone a ceaseless process of evolution, with each stage of evolution adding more and more complexity of form to the universe. From simple strings to quarks, to atoms, to molecules, to cells, to multicellular organisms, with organisms themselves evolving into ever more complex forms. From single-celled organisms to photosynthetic plants, to animals with perceiving neuronal nets, to instinct-driven reptilian brain stems, to emotion-generating limbic systems, to logic-capable triune brains, whose synaptic connections, we noted, number more than all the stars in the known universe.
That's kind of staggering. Okay, thank you. So the same complexification has occurred interiorly. Human beings, for example, evolved from simple archaic to first-person magic, to second-person mythic, to third-person rational, to fourth-person pluralistic, to fifth-person and higher integral. These ordinal numbers refer to the number of overall perspectives an individual can simultaneously keep in mind. Each of these new major stages of human development and evolution adds a new perspective, a new and larger degree of consciousness, and thus consciousness itself continues to grow, expand, and become larger and larger, more and more whole. This greater wholeness grows along with one's greater and greater capacity for love, care, identity, concern, morals, compassion, creativity, etc. Eva, I think you're still here, so maybe number 16, please.
Okay. The universe of form, in other words, is becoming fuller and fuller via evolution. Thus, to reach enlightenment in today's world, to experience the unity of emptiness and form, is not to have any more freedom than the early great sages, East and West, since emptiness is same, but enlightenment is fuller, since the universe of form has continued to grow and evolve, adding more and more complexity, more form and fullness, more wholeness at each point.
Thank you. It's great to hear the crickets.
Yes.
It's been several months since I've heard a cricket here.
Last day, tomorrow I fly back.
Oh, you poor thing. You're coming back to a storm.
I know.
So somebody asked Wilbur, I guess it was just in some sort of interview, you know, what's the difference between you and Buddha? And he said, I can drive a Jeep. So that says a lot. A lot is implied in there being a Jeep and being able to do that. Okay, so we're now in a position to understand Wilber's explanation of the different meanings of the extremely fuzzy word spiritual. One of the trickiest questions is whether spirituality itself unfolds in stages. The answer depends on how we define the word. Wilber believes that there are at least 4 very different definitions, all of which appear to be legitimate uses of the term. However, they need to be clarified in order to facilitate dialogue. He feels that all of them deserve to be included to some degree in any integral model. So here, whereabouts am I? Okay. Here are the lists that he came up with. So both scholars and lay people tend to use it in 4 ways. First, as the highest levels in any of the developmental lines. And then as a separate developmental line all by itself. But also it's used to describe an extraordinary peak experience or state. And it also describes a particular attitude that you can have at whatever stage you're at. So let's take a look at these in a little more detail. The first meaning, the highest level of lines of development. In this meaning, spirituality basically means the transpersonal, the transrational, post-conventional levels of any of the lines of development. Examples of this are our highest cognitive abilities, transrational intuition, for instance, our most developed affects, transpersonal love for the entire planet, our highest moral aspirations, transcendental compassion for all sentient beings, our most evolved self, the transpersonal self or supra-individual witness, etc. You could go on and on for all of the different lines. In this usage, spirituality definitely follows a sequential or stage-like course because it is by definition the post-conventional stages in any of the developmental lines. I think we have run out. Oh no, Meryl is here. Good. Thank you. You can read number 17. I'll come back to this list in a minute. There we go. The last reading.
This is a very common usage, reflecting those aspects of spirituality that embody the very highest capacities, the noblest motives, the best of aspirations, the farthest reaches of human nature, the most highly evolved, the growing tip, the leading edge, all of which point to the highest levels in any of the lines.
Okay. So we'll go back to our list of meanings. The separate developmental line. Sometimes people speak of something like spiritual intelligence, which is not only at the highest levels of any of the lines, but is its own developmental line, going all the way down to the earliest of years. James Fowler is one example of this. In this meaning, the spiritual line of development has its own first, second, and third tiers or structure stages. And these stages reach all the way down to Fowler's stage 0. In other words, this line has its own pre-personal, personal, and transpersonal levels or stages. Okay, the third meaning here, extraordinary peak experience or state. People also speak of spirituality in the sense of a religious or spiritual experience, meditative experience, or peak experience. So scholars such as William James, Daniel P. Brown, Evelyn Underhill, and Daniel Goleman all describe spirituality as a state experience, which, as we have seen, is often trained. Peak experiences do not normally show development or stage-like unfolding. They are temporary, passing, and transient. In addition, states, unlike stage structures, are mostly incompatible. So for instance, you cannot be drunk and sober at the same time. This is quite unlike structures which, because they transcend and include earlier structures, can easily coexist with them. However, if you examine peak experiences more closely, you will find that they generally involve psychic, subtle, causal, or non-dual peak experiences, which are then reinterpreted through archaic magic, mythic, or rational structures. This is an important definition of spirituality and helps to show that temporary peak experiences of the transpersonal realms are possible at virtually any stage of development, as we saw with the lattice. Okay, so this last one, that spirituality is a particular attitude. This is probably the most popular and common definition. Unfortunately, it has proven to be very difficult to define or even state in a coherent fashion. We can't just say that the requisite attitude is love, because love, according to most research, tends, like other emotions, to unfold from egocentric to sociocentric to world-centric modes. This means that this attitude is not fully present at all of the levels, but rather itself develops. Besides, do we really want to call egocentric love spiritual? What about openness? Here again, we need to ask if the capacity for openness simply shows up fully formed, or does it develop over time? And just how open can a pre-conventional individual be when he or she cannot even take the role of the other? Despite this, Wilber believes that it is a legitimate meaning of spirituality, but says that coherent examples of it have been scarce. Okay, so that's the end of our talk tonight. Before we have our discussion, I want to draw your attention to the fact that there is no class next week because of a certain feast that begins the fast. So our next class will be on March the 8th. And because it's in the middle of the fast, I'm not sure what time we should start. Typically, we start at 7:30. I'm wondering whether we should start at 8 o'clock for the next two classes, the 8th and the 15th. So why don't we just do a raise your hand in the screen? We'll say how many people want to do 7:30 next time. Stay with the current time. Bill's okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Whoa. Okay, I think I might have missed some. Is anybody in favor of starting at 8 o'clock and going till 9:30? Bill, oh, I think you can't have it both ways, Bill. What is it? Oh, you're unmuted.
I just think both options are equally attractive
Okay.
to me.
Okay, well, I'm just wondering, not everybody's actually going to be doing the fast, but for those of you who are.
All you young people, all the young people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Bill's 2 hours behind us, so it doesn't make a difference.
I'm only 1 hour behind, but maybe in reality, I'm actually 2 hours behind because you guys are pretty fast.
Okay, Belinda, what would you like to say? Yeah, you're on.
Take into account daylight saving.
That doesn't happen until the 12th of March. So it'll affect the second class, but not the first one.
Okay.
So in that case, are we still good for 7:30?
No, well.
What do you want?
You can turn off your screen and eat if you need to. Yeah. Or you can just eat in front of us. I don't care. Okay, so we'll leave it at 7:30. All right, so that's the only issue I had to address tonight. Now, what did you think of what I just covered tonight? Anybody got some questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, Sai, what's up?
I just wanted to throw in, I've spoke to a few people that say they're spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
And one of the main things they say, there's no God involved, which I don't think was mentioned. So I'm not sure.
What does spiritual mean to them then?
Well, they just everything except God. I mean, they
I
like
don't
all
understand.
these. I know I don't either, but I'm just saying that's what they told me. So they just don't like that word, I think. And they'll use the word universe. They say the universe did this, and the universe did that,
Yeah.
but it's not God. They just don't like the word, I think.
And I think that has something to do with what we were talking about with the history of Christianity, where people have a very limited understanding of what God is. They have that mythic view that has not evolved to the rational or the pluralistic or the integral stages. And I knowing that, I don't have any problem with them taking issue with that word, because what they mean by that word and what I mean by that word are miles apart, I think. Anyway, anybody want to add anything? Okay, Bill.
I just wanted to relate some things that I've run across that bear out some of the things we've heard today. That there's this idea that you can see or be aware of things at higher states, but only within the context of the state that you're in. It pops up all the time. We just had a Baha'i seeker that I'm working with, someone who made contact with them, who was very interested in the faith, but he went quiet for like 3 weeks, and we recontacted him, and he said that he thinks that God has been hijacked by the devil, and that all the religions are essentially manifestations of evil. So he's come to this conclusion. And the people that I'm working with that were trying to teach him were like, this guy's nuts. And while there's strong evidence that might be the case, it occurred to me that he's saying exactly what another person that might be a different level of consciousness might be saying about how the people who have who are using are using the faith, or not the faith, but religions as a vehicle to obtain their personal agendas. Which is, I think, like when we talk about some of the mullahs in Iran, and some of the preachers in America, and such as that, so we might see that as at that level and say that, and we think we're personally rational with that understanding. But when we have this person who just sees the devil has taken over, that God has been hijacked, essentially, that the devil has taken over the whole concept of God and pushed him aside. I think this thing that is brought out very well in this session today.
So Merrill, Jack, I see your hand up, but I would like to see what Merrill has to say in response to Bill's point.
I think it's back to the shadow effect idea, like anything that people stuff down in their psyche and don't look at can become shadow material. But once you let God's light into it, it will open up.
That's a good insight. Okay, well, we've got
shadow
Jack.
Effect. The shadow effect, that book I held up the other day. Yeah.
Okay, well, I see Jack but Belinda would like to say something
Yeah,
specific.
let Belinda go first, no problem.
Okay.
Okay, I was just thinking that Bill might teach his friend about Zoroaster, because what his friend is describing is the battle between Ahriman and Ahura Mazda. And that does underlie, that's the underwear of our Judeo-Christian religions.
Nice.
In some respects. I don't give me credit for that. So, a book I read about Zoroastrians used that term, and I really liked it. But I wanted also to mention, and this is in the same connection, when we went back to, I think it's reading 13, that I have to keep changing my glasses here. Reading 13 and 12, no, 11 and 12 and 13. it seems that is what's being described here is, what's his name, Swedenborg?
Yep.
Swedenborg is what Swedenborg was talking about in the 1700s. And this came up in Harold's course last week. And David and I did a little research on Swedenborg. It turns out he influenced quite an array of people, including Blake, Joseph Smith, and who was the other one? Well, people like the American Emerson.
Emerson, yeah.
Yeah. So quite
Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe. Quite an array of people were influenced by him. And Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
So if anyone's ever read The Brothers Karamazov, I think it's in the book 1, chapter 6, where the brother who's a monk tells a story that he's heard from his abbot about how Jesus came back to Spain and the Inquisition captured him and put him in jail. And then the Inquisitor goes to see him and explains to him they can't let him out because they have taken over the church and they can't let him speak again.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, in that story, Dostoevsky describes what Swedenborg called the Great Apostasy. And that's referred to here in these selections again. Now, what's kind of interesting is you get him influencing somebody like Joseph Smith, who founds the Mormon Church, who finds it, and if you look carefully at the Mormon Church, they have many great qualities, but they're also doing the same thing that every other Christian church has done, freezing themselves at this level described here. So it's kind of interesting. I could go on, but I think I'll shut up now.
No, go on.
Great insights. Really nice.
Well, this is a result of the conversations David and I had last week. So, and he
Very
knew
good.
more about Swedenborg than I did. So,
He's a fascinating fellow.
yes.
I mean, he was
And his followers formed a church. And there's at least one such church in Canada, I forget where, and 1 or 2 in the United States. Amazingly.
well, he was a straight ahead, excellent scientist for most of his life.
Yes.
But then all of a sudden he started to have all these visions and dreams, which he
Yeah.
documented in his own diary. And it led to some fascinating interpretations of the Bible from higher levels of consciousness.
Definitely higher levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
But this all explains, for me, it's very, very apparent in places like Texas, I guess, and elsewhere, and even across the world, how the legacy religions that we have now have all frozen at a certain point. And even if they have the capacity to go further, at some level, they're being frozen, especially if they get connected up with a political agenda.
Yeah.
If a religion becomes part of a national identity, it both become toxic. Here you don't have to look very far, hear very much news to pick up on that.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Okay, Jack, let's see if you can top that. Boy.
Well, I'm not trying to top anything, but I just want to respond to a few of the comments that have already been made, if I can remember them all.
Well, take them one at a time.
I didn't make a list, so I may forget a few, but I would point out, well, let's go back to Sai's comment. Not everybody who says they're spiritual but not religious defines themselves as an atheist. That is not the case. Some of them do, but there are many people who say I'm spiritual but not religious who still believe in God. As for this new agey thing of substituting the word universe for God, you know, the universe revealed to me this and that, you know, it's very obvious what's taking place here. They're just substituting the word universe for God. But when you think about it, it's a totally ridiculous concept. If you compare the theistic concept of God with the concept of the universe, first of all, the universe has no conscious will, no conscious intelligence. So the whole idea of referring to the universe is in a way ridiculous and doesn't make any sense if you stop to think about it, what is meant by the universe, because the universe lacks intelligence and conscious will, which is usually how we define God.
Well, you're talking about the physical universe.
Yeah, of course. So
But what about the subtle one? What about the causal one? What about the non-dual one?
You mean Wilber's universe?
Well, he calls it the cosmos, right? And he's including all those other things in that sense of universe. And I suspect he would say that
Yeah.
it's not without possibility that the universe as a whole has consciousness. So the person
Yeah, I
who's
would even
using
say-
that term universe as a substitute for God may not be completely off base, but they're probably not aware of those kinds of dialogues.
Yeah, I don't think so, Mark. They're thinking at that level of sophistication.
No, probably not.
Yeah. So what were some of the other points I wanted to respond to? This idea of the battle between light and darkness that Belinda was talking about, which is a Zoroastrian concept. It is very much part of the Baha'i vocabulary as well. If you read Shoghi Effendi, he very clearly says that there is a great contest that's going on between the forces of light and darkness. It's practically impossible to get rid of this contrasting metaphor in the world of religion, except unlike Zoroastrians, we are not dualistic. We are not dualistic. But there is no doubt that there is, if you like, a great battle going on in our world today. It seems sometimes that the forces of darkness seem to be winning. Baha'u'llah did say that when you look at the world, when you consider the evil that's in the world, this is in Gleanings, so I'm not making this up. He says it looks like, quote, the very metropolis of Satan. The very metropolis of Satan. So, but the difference is that we have a different understanding of the satanic force than fundamentalist Christians do. Baha'i teaching says that the satanic force originates in the human heart through human disobedience and making the wrong choices. It's not like, remember Flip Wilson used to do in his comic routine, the devil made me do it? Blame it all on the devil. It's really easy to blame it all on the devil, because then you can objectify the source of evil outside of yourself. Yeah. But Baha'u'llah says, no, this is not the case. The evil results from choices that the human being makes. And these choices are usually disobedience to one of God's commands. So now I am going on a bit. I'll try to shorten it. People like to.
Well, I see that Meryl has her hand up. She'd like to respond to what you're just saying now before you go on to another point.
Well, let me go. Okay, go ahead, Meryl. But Mark, I want to come back to another point about.
Yep, no problem.
Okay.
So the shadow effect says almost exactly what you just said, that the evil is really all these choices that we've shoved down and don't want to look at.
Right.
And because we don't look at them, they get darker and darker. And it's like there's this big, thick fog that they create. But it's a mistake to say, oh, the devil, like personified, is out there. It's the result of choices inside us because we're afraid to look. But if we look and let God's light in and just notice, oh, I'm an imperfect human being. I goofed up. I'm going to get back on track. It clears up. Like it's all in the shadow. That book.
Yeah, I agree, Meryl, and perfect. And I just wanted to say that Meryl is in a group of progressive Christians that I introduced her. So theoretically, I'm supposed to be in that group, but I don't go much anymore. But I would just mention that group is not frozen in their Christianity. They are seriously looking to experiment with research. They're exposing themselves to different traditions, to progressive thinkers within Christianity, to indigenous religions, to the great mythologist Joseph Campbell, and so on and so forth. So, but they remain within the Christian fold, but they don't want to go, they don't want to disaffiliate themselves with the church, but they continue to experiment within the Christian church to try to expand the parameters of Christianity in creative ways. And I think that's a very good thing. So not everybody's stuck at the mythic literal level.
I'm in another group of Christians that are very much in a very different way from this group that you're describing, but equally very, very open to non-mythic levels, what you're calling mythic levels.
Right, right. The last thing, Mark, I want to mention, which I started out to mention, was this, and I want you to give your response. I have a whole chapter in one of my books, which is not yet published, on my own mystical experiences. The only reason I did this was because I wanted to leave something for Baha'i scholars if they ever wanted to discuss mysticism within the Baha'i faith. What I wanted to mention was my mystical experiences started when I was 7 years old. The first one was in church. My mother was studying the Baha'i faith at the time. She sent us, the McLean kids, to, I think it was the Baptist church, while she was studying the faith. She became a Baha'i in 52. And in Sunday school, I had one of my first two mystical experiences, and that was the presence of a being in that room. I don't know if it was Jesus, Baha'u'llah, or who it was, but all I know is one Sunday, a wonderful being of light came into that room. This was not a visual experience. It was a feeling experience. I couldn't see anything, but I was aware, and it had nothing to do with my chronological age whatsoever. Nothing to do with my chronological age. I experienced this being as, I mean, I could have had this experience when I was 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, or 70 years old. And in that sense, the soul is, I think, out of time. But this being said, you are loved, you are safe, you are in peace. Of course, I'm going to get emotional talking about it, but that's okay. Now, the other one, and Mark, I just like,
Jack, I don't know if we want to keep going on into the specific examples.
okay, well then respond to this experience of a 7-year-old in terms of what Wilber's saying.
Well, he's making the point that mystical experiences of all kinds are accessible no matter what age you are, no matter what level of or structural level you happen to be at. So he wouldn't have
Okay.
any quarrel with you having an experience like that at 7. In fact, he'd say that it's possible to have them even younger than that.
Oh, okay, good. So he's
So-
not relating this to adult experiences only.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, good.
Yeah. But the way you interpret it might have changed over your lifetime as you grew up in his sense of the word,
Right,
as you evolved through the stages.
right, agreed. Yes, okay, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, Ingrid, you've been very patient. So what would you like to say?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I just read a book that it talked about the shadow effect, but sort of in Buddhist terms.
Oh,
And it was a lovely book. It just blew me away. It was called Living Untethered by a
Okay.
Buddhist named Michael A. Singer. And he referred to the shadows as being essentially sanskaras.
mhm.
And that we're to bring them out into the light, not repress them or suppress them, but not to judge them when we have them, not to judge them either, just to acknowledge them in a state of, sort of consciousness, just to acknowledge these things, and in essence make friends with them, but not judge them as good or bad. So I thought that would just sort of expand on what Mara was saying about from the person who had written about these shadows. It's certainly a topical topic these days.
Yes, it is. Both on the individual and the collective levels.
Yeah.
Good points. Okay. All right. So is it David or is it Belinda? Oh, David. Okay.
Hi. Um, one thing is that I sometimes feel that we take the word spiritual or spirituality for granted.
For granted?
Yeah,
Like we know what it means.
yeah, we take it for granted,
Uh-huh.
as if we know what it means automatically.
Right.
Yeah, and from a language point of view, it's a bit different because it derives, from the word or the root spirit. And there are different meanings of spirit, and you can have spirit in terms of alcohol. You can have spirit in terms of sprites, in mythology, you can have spirit in relation to animation, and things. What? Breath. Oh yeah, breath. That's the other meaning. Breath.
Right.
The spirit. Yeah, and so the way we use the word spirit or spirituality, for me personally, I find it quite nebulous, and so there are times when I don't know what the heck people are talking about, including myself.
Now, when you saw that chart with the 4 meanings, was one of them, did one of them resonate more than the others for you?
I don't know, Mark. I really have to go over it again.
Okay.
That's a good
Oh,
question.
you've got the chart in front of
Oh,
you.
I've got the chart in front of me. I do? Have the chart in front of me? Where? Oh, no, I don't. Oh, I don't have the chart in front of me.
It's this.
What? Oh.
So it's a list of 4. Yeah. Oh, you've gone mute. Oh, I don't know how that happens. You didn't touch anything. That's weird.
Lots of things are weird around here.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Yeah, I did wonder about these 4, and see, for me, number 1 is too general. You know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. For me,
No.
it's just general. A separate developmental line itself. Well, I'm not sure I know what that means. You know, an extraordinary peak experience or state. Well, yeah, but once again, it more state than it would be experience. But once again, I'm not sure. Just all for myself, I don't know. A particular attitude, such as openness or love. I think number 4 is more, well, quote unquote, concrete for me. I think I would, if I had to make a choice, I would probably pick number 4. You see,
Okay.
because I don't really, the other 3 I'm not sure about in terms of the meaning. I mean,
Well, I mean, you should try and get yourself a copy of Integral Spirituality, because he does go into a lot more detail about what each of those 4 meanings are about.
okay. All right, now,
But
yeah,
you know, that's not a quick solution tonight.
no. Right. Okay, now, okay. So let me be quick about the other thing I wanted to say. Baha'u'llah states, if I'm not mistaken, that evil rests in the human breast. In other words, within ourselves.
Yeah, that's Jack's point. Yeah.
It's not something outside us. It's something that's in us. It's our own darkness, you know. And okay, now we all have a choice. And you know, if you're asleep, then that to me is unconscious. If you are awake, you're not unconscious, at least not in certain senses anyway. And what does that mean? You know, you've been talking about this all the way through. And the main thing I think about, as Baha'u'llah says, I think it's in the Kitab-i-Iqan, that the most important thing is that we're tested. And that really, in both concrete and in so-called spiritual term, you know, it's those tests that are the most important thing. You know, Baha'u'llah gives the example of Job, for example. When the devil, I mean, there was a wager going on between God and the devil. Devil had been a fallen angel or something, and you know, and there was a wager going on. And so what was Job going to do? How was he going to be in meeting those tests? You know, and Baha'u'llah also gives in gleanings, I think 3 or 4 definitions of divine unity. And that divine unity, I mention that because I think that applies also, you know, to the word spirituality and to much of what you've been presenting. Baruch Spinoza got in trouble in his time with the synagogue because he didn't directly say that God is supreme or that God is the most this, that, or the other thing. For him, the universe,
Universe again.
yeah, the universe is both the creator and the creation. There was no dividing line for Spinoza. And you know, to this day, what he has said about that resonates in our time.
Mhm.
Nature, Baha'u'llah says, is one of the worlds of God. That means the universe too. The universe is one of the worlds of God, one of the divine worlds of God. So how you can say, you know, that, you know, it is conscious or not, or this, that, or the other thing, for me, just doesn't make any sense at all. None of it does. Because we then make ourselves egocentric. I think the word is. We're egocentric in relation to what we've done to the planet, and we can be so in relation to the universe too. So, you know, I just feel it's very simplistic to say, you know, that the universe is not conscious. You know, you could say the universe is as diverse as we are on Earth with regard to people, with regard to all the beings on Earth, and plants, animals, and so on and so forth. You know, and you know, I don't think we can, you know, just say the universe is still a great, great mystery. And the astronomers and the cosmologists, they know this. They know this. And so, for example, I just read that, you know, in terms of the Big Bang that you mentioned, you know, which is really, I think, a paradigm. And they just discovered that the astronomers, that the very early I don't know the James Webb telescope or not, but the thing is that galaxies were formed a lot earlier than was thought, much closer to the Big Bang. And that this is puzzling the astronomers. You know, how does that come about? So I'm just saying, you know, that you know, when we talk, I think sometimes we're just talking about ourselves.
I wouldn't say just once in a while. I would say all the time, 24/7.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's worth remembering that we each have a human-centered point of view. It may not be so much egocentric, but it's certainly human-centered.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Sai, you have got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a quick, I'm not sure if this is the book Ingrid was talking about.
Untethered Soul, that could well be it.
I believe it's very good.
What's the name of the author again?
Michael A. Singer.
Okay.
Oh, I'm over there now.
I think that's his first book, Sai, and the book that, yeah.
So there's one after this. What was it called? It says Tethered in it too, Ingrid.
He did write a different book. I think you'll see it somewhere referred to in that book.
Okay.
But this is the only one that I've read, and it talks about the origins of the universe. I mean, there are whole sections at the beginning that are, you know, I can't evaluate the scientific, you know, explanations he gives, but it certainly sounds very good. It's a lovely, lovely book.
Yeah. What I want to mention was response to Jack. So it's to do with so what I've been reading William Hatcher quite a bit. And so he defines the four known forces: gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak and strong nuclear. And he proposes a fifth force, which he calls the evolutionary force. And in that book, it's basically God, but he gives it that so that it appeals more to scientists
type thinking people, I think. So I use that when I talk. I do have a couple of atheist friends, and I refer to God as the evolutionary force, so it doesn't get me in trouble. Anyway, I just thought I'd.
Thank you, Sai. Mark, I think reading 17 is that you gave tonight from Wilber is a perfect description of how Abdu'l-Baha defines spirituality.
I better call it up here just a sec.
And, you know, I explored this whole concept in a book called Dimensions in Spirituality. In case anybody hasn't read it, I've tried to do it from a Baha'i point of view, but I think reading 17 is a perfect description of how Abdu'l-Baha viewed spirituality.
This is a very common usage reflecting those aspects of spirituality that embody the very highest capacities, the noblest motives, the best of aspirations, the farthest reaches of human nature, the most highly evolved, the growing tip, the leading edge, all of which point to the highest levels in any of the lines.
I think that's very compatible with Baha'i understanding. And I don't want to argue with my friend David, but Abdu'l-Baha was categorical on this point, that nature does not have a conscious will of his own. That is scriptural.
Yeah.
He said many fantastic things about nature. Nature is mysterious. You know, David, when I was with you and Belinda years ago at Montebello, I had an experience of an archetype there right in your presence when I was lying on the grass. So there are lots of things that we don't understand, but Abdu'l-Baha, in his arguments for the existence of God, he says that nature is acted upon by the divine force. It doesn't act by its own will. So no, nature, you know, I'm leaving the door open to mystery, but I have to go with what Abdu'l-Baha said on that point, that nature does not have a conscious will of its own.
Okay, Ingrid.
Yeah, I remember a book that that I read about 10, 12 years ago, written by the former member of the House of Justice, Hooper Dunbar.
Oh, yeah.
And it was called The Forces of Light and Darkness.
There you go.
And I can't remember, but I would say, he was looking at the sort of cultural things in the world, like materialism would be a force, for instance. But that was also a very, very excellent book looking at this, light and dark and evil and Satan. Mr. Taherzadeh, Deep Taherzadeh, in his talks often will say there is no such thing as evil. He'll say, don't get me wrong, there's lots of evil things in the world, but he'll say, but evil is just the absence of the good, So just a little bit about that whole debate about light and darkness. And
So I'm noticing a couple of
Thank you.
chats from Mary. Maybe she could talk about them.
Okay. Sorry.
Who am I standing in the midst of this thought traffic? What are you saying there?
I don't know. Tonight, I'm sorry, today probably is my last and I'm going to miss. I hope somebody, I can, in YouTube, I can listen to your talk later on, but I hope somebody take a note for after finish the class, each time when you have a conversation, some of highlight of that somebody write for me. This is really for me today. I don't know where I am. Suddenly I remember this from Rumi came to my mind. Yes, because it's so much. And, I don't know why he never wants to read anything. He brings something from similar rewriting of Abdu'l-Baha or Baha'u'llah. He brings some of that, some of quote, for example, I wish I can read 17 for you, because that was for me, as Jack mentioned, it was very touchy. It was very close to our writing. Or for a few days ago, I was listening to BBC, CBC or something, and a lady talking, and I don't know, I was working, just always I have a radio, suddenly said about marriage, and suddenly said, yes, marriage is a bird with two wings, if they do both of them not. And I was thinking, who is that? You know, and he was writer. And you know, they are reading Baha'i writings, but they use for themselves and they take an idea from that, and they never mention. They don't bring it. Or, you know, lots of scholars, lots of writers, I believe they know, but they don't want it. He was in Buddhism and suddenly went to Christianity and all of that. You know, today it was very, when you send it, I wish I had more time. And yesterday, when I was reading all of that, really, I was in somewhere I didn't know, in the middle of traffic thought. My mind, so much in my brain, I cannot say. I don't know, probably you never have this stage, but I can't.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think he is so comprehensive that it's easy to be overwhelmed. Depending on the level of familiarity you have with some of the subject areas that he addresses. If there are two or three that you don't know anything about, it's easy to lose the thread. What is it that's going on here?
No, just today, just the last classes, not just this one. Because I know very well about, not very well at all, just a little bit, few drops of Buddhism I know. Okay, I knew before. And I find lots after this class, and you know, different stages, all of that for me, it was so good. And you providing, you make it so understandable. But I don't know, suddenly, I don't know what I meant. For example, when we are talking about some people, they don't believe in God, but some people, they say mother of nature. That's an example. You know, they don't say, they say mother of nature, mother of nature. And I have a friend, always she doesn't want to believe, and she was very good Christian. I say mother of nature. I say, okay, remember, you say mother of nature. A mother created the nature. Not, you know, physically, but spiritually. Not to build the mountain or something. But when you're talking about mother of nature, go a little bit deeper. You know, these are all, you know, at the moment, I don't know. People, they want to run away from spirituality, or when we are talking a level of spirituality, for me, spirituality doesn't have any degree on. It's not a temperature. We can put and say, oh, it's a 40 degree, it's a very high. You know, it's something, I don't know. I'm going to think about that during, probably I was, you know, I don't know, probably I was too much. Sorry. I hope you can help me, somebody. I don't know, but I'm in that stage just from yesterday.
Very good. You know, right now, Mark, I'm thinking of Joey when we were taking your class on the primal will. And we would go, oh, now I get it. No, wait a minute. Now I don't get it. And, you know, this is a normal, you know, we thought we'd made a breakthrough, and then in the next minute we'd get confused again. We didn't really understand. So, you know, I think this is a normal process of learning. And, you know, Baha'u'llah says in Hidden Word 66, O children from the Arabic, O children of the divine and invisible essence. That's us.
Mhm.
Ye shall be hindered from loving me,
Yeah.
and souls shall be perturbed as they make mention of me. For minds cannot grasp me,
Thank
nor
you.
hearts contain me.
Thank you.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you, Mark, for all, for everything.
So, so the next class I have called The Languages of the Divine. So that's going to be the last class on Wilber specifically. And I really hope you're able to come to that one. It's a great class. I just finished writing it. Because it's his vision of the future. And I think we can adopt some of his goals, not all of them, but some of them for ourselves. And one of them is creating a new language of God. And one of the words that we have to rehabilitate or dispense with altogether is spirituality. It's so confused at the moment, partly because people don't have access to the experiences anymore. They've heard about it in books, but they haven't had the experiences. So how are we going to change that? It's a big task, but fortunately we don't have to finish it by 2023. We have a little time.
Well, I wonder what Abdul Baha would think of that, because we use that word all the time.
Which?
Spiritual and spirituality.
Well, we need to do an in-depth study of what he meant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's one of the first places to start that kind of discovery. Because he knew what he was talking about. There's no question about it. And Sai says, get rid of the word prophet. Anyway, folks, we're way over time tonight. So good night, and we'll see you in
Thank you,
2
Mark.
weeks.
Thank you, Linda.
I'll send out the video tomorrow.
Thank you.
Very much.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Bye bye.
Hey.